was kind of born to be a Marine. My father was killed in Bella Wood the day I was born.
Bella Wood?
Almost the same hour. All I ever thought about was being a Marine. I took exercises, I never drank or smoked, I studied all about them. I can tell you every battle the Marines are in from 1775 down to now. New Providence, Fort Nassau, the Second Battle of Trenton, the Bonhomme Richard and the Serapis. I've not yet begun to fight. Tripoli in 1805, Nuka Hive in 1812, the Battle of Hatchie-Lusty River in 1837, Vera Cruz in 46, Chapultepec, the Halls of Montezuma, Panama in 85, Guantanamo Bay in 98, then the Philippines, the Boxer Rebellion in China, Nicaragua, Coitepe Hill, Fort Riviere in Haiti, then Chateau-Thierry, Bella Wood, the charge at Soissons, San Miguel, and now Wake Island, Guam, Bataan, Corregidor, Guadalcanal. They bled and died. Tripoli in 1805, Tripoli in 1805, Tripoli in 1805. They bled and died.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Could I ask you?
Hello.
Yes, hello. Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you know the words to the United States Marine hymn?
United States Marine hymn. Is that the From the Halls of Montezuma
to the shores of Tripoli?
We fight our country's battles in the air, on land, and sea.
We will fight for right and liberty and to keep our honor clean.
We are proud to bear the title of the United States Marines.
Tripoli. Why is Tripoli in there?
I don't know.
Do you know why it's mentioned?
Is in Italy, isn't it?
I have absolutely no clue.
Why is the word Tripoli in there? Do you know?
I don't, but I bet you it has something to do with Greeks.
Why is Tripoli mentioned in there? Do you know that?
Tripoli, the North African city of Tripoli, where the United States Marines and mercenaries had their first American victory on that soil. They fought the Muslim terrorists on the Barbary Coast.
Very good. Most Americans don't even know that. Thank you very much.
No problem. Oh, wait. Did you also know that it was 38 Greek Orthodox Christians who saved the day?
No, I didn't know that. Do you mean they're among the mercenaries?
They weren't just any mercenaries. They didn't just prostitute themselves like other mercenaries did. They were actually in it. Their hearts were in it. And they actually gave money to the American leaders for this cause. Instead of getting paid, they gave money, and they led them into victory.
Why would they give the Americans money if they were mercenaries?
Well, because there was also a group of about 200 Muslim mercenaries that demanded extra money, demanded more pay along the way, and the Americans simply did not have the budget, so the Greeks pulled their money together and decided to give their money for the cause. So they weren't, in my eyes, they weren't mercenaries, they were heroes.
Did they ever get paid back?
I don't believe so.
On September 11, 2001, the United States of America was brutally attacked by Islamic fundamentalists from the Middle East. Their supporters claimed that they acted out of a sense of religious duty to punish this nation for certain foreign policies that infuriated them. The events of 9/11 were a tragedy that shocked the nation. However, this was not the first time that Americans in large numbers were victimized and terrorized by followers of an intolerant Islamic faction. Their attacks on citizens of the United States date back to the beginnings of her history. Shortly after the end of the American Revolution, our merchant ships were repeatedly attacked or captured by so-called Barbary pirates. In reality, they were not pirates, but sanctioned naval forces of Muslim rulers in North Africa. Though nominally under Turkish rule, all of them were essentially independent. Several leaders in these countries engaged in the first Islamic wars against the U.S. during the first 3 decades of her history as a nation. These conflicts were jihads, as they had clearly defined aspects of a Muslim struggle against American Christian infidels. Numerous Americans lost their lives or spent long periods in slavery as a result of depredations by Islamists who hated America during the 18th and 19th centuries. What motivated this earlier version of contemporary terrorists? They could not blame U.S. foreign policy. If ever a nation just wanted to be left in peace without disturbing any other people, it was America during the early years of her history. It had no significant military, political, or economic involvement in the Middle East during this era. The first Muslim attacks in America were not prompted by anything the country did, but rather by what it was. It was a non-Islamic nation that was considered too weak to defend itself. Therefore, some of the North African rulers determined that Americans were fair game to be legitimately targeted and victimized. They could not easily reach this nation itself, so they concentrated on attacking U.S. ships on the high seas. It was these early assaults that involved America in its first foreign wars and helped establish the foundation for future national greatness. The history of these events gives us a unique perspective on the contemporary war against Islamic terrorism. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris gave international recognition to the independence of the United States. 2 years later, 2 American ships, the Maria and the Dauphine, were captured in the Atlantic by Algerian naval forces. Its crews of American citizens were enslaved. The Dey, or ruler of Algiers, offered to sell them back to the United States for the then astronomical sum of $3,000 per person. He also contemptuously demanded the payment of a large annual tribute by the U.S. government. The financial resources of the young nation were so limited that the Algerian extortion could not be met. America had no military force capable of freeing its own citizens. The U.S. government unsuccessfully tried to negotiate the release of its captured people. In 1791, Ali Hassan became the new ruler of Algiers, while Americans still languished in Arab slavery. James Leander Cathcart, a Revolutionary War veteran, was on the Maria. He described his experiences in a secret journal he kept during his long captivity.
July 25th, 1793. For 8 years, I have been exposed to every indignity that a Mohammedan could invent to render the life of a Christian captive truly and sentimentally miserable. Destitute of friends to console me in time of affliction, at times without either meat, drink, or raiment, but the small miserable pittance of black bread, olives, and horse beans allowed us by the Regency of Algiers, even the small allowance of 7.5 cents a day which was allowed us by our country has been long discontinued ever since September 1789, and no notice whatever taken of us for years, except that now and then some person would ascertain the sum demanded for our ransom, which for a time would revive our hopes, but ultimately would sink us into the abyss of despondency and despair when we found that the report of our redemption being near would die away. Continually enclosed in those pandemoniums called bagnios, or slave prison, where every vice was not only tolerated but encouraged, exposed to the plague for several years, where hundreds of our fellow prisoners were dying around us, and thousands of the inhabitants, and not knowing but the present moment would be our last. America, could you see the miserable situation of your fellow citizens in captivity who have shed their blood to secure you the liberty you now possess and enjoy, and who now have their misery augmented by the consideration that the country for which they fought is now free and in a flourishing condition? You are the first that set the example to the world to shake off the yoke of tyranny, to expel despotism and injustice from the face of the earth. James Leander Cathcart.
George Washington was President of the United States at the time that Cathcart secretly expressed his despair. During that same year, the Algerians went on a major naval offensive against American ships, effectively entering into a state of war with the United States. In October and November of 1793, 11 U.S. vessels were seized on the high seas in the Atlantic. Many more of its citizens were captured and became slaves of Dey Hassan Pasha. Young John Foss was on the Baltimore brig Polly, which was captured on October 23, 1793. The Algerians had treacherously placed a British flag on their ship so they could take the Americans by surprise. The captives were taken to the Dey's palace in Algiers. Foss recalled his ordeal.
We were conducted to the Bey's palace by a guard, and as we passed through the streets, our ears were stunned with the shouts, clapping of hands, and other acclamations of joy from the inhabitants, thanking God for their great success and victories over so many Christian dogs and unbelievers, which is the appellation they generally give to all Christians. On our arrival at the gates of the palace, we were received by another guard and conducted before the Bey, who, after taking a view of us, told us he had sent several times to our government entreating them to negotiate with him for a peace, and had never received any satisfactory answer from them, and that he was determined never to make a peace with the United States in his reign, as they had so often neglected his requests, and treated him with disdain, adding, "Now I've got you, Christian dogs, you shall eat stones."
The Dey was angry because the U.S. would not pay the extortionist tribute he demanded in order to ensure that he would not attack its ships. The new American prisoners in Algeria suffered as greatly, if not more, than previous ones. Foss indicated that he was restrained in his account of his captivity. He had an explanation for the Algerian actions against Americans, writing that they are taught by the religion of Muhammad to persecute all its opposers. The capture of 11 U.S. ships and numerous citizens by seagoing Arab Muslim raiders caused an outrage in America. President Washington sought to free his fellow citizens. He considered different options, including negotiations and possible use of force. However, he was seriously handicapped on both grounds. His nation had very little capital to pay for ransom, and there was no navy that could be used to rescue the prisoners. Incredibly, the Revolutionary Navy had been disbanded years earlier to save money and avoid foreign entanglements. For the moment, America was essentially defenseless against the state of Algiers. The president pursued negotiations with the Dey. More importantly, he sent a proposal to Congress for the creation of a permanent navy to protect national security and the nation's interests on the high seas. After considerable debate, Congress passed the appropriate legislation. On March 27, 1794, Washington signed a bill which provided $688,888 that he was authorized to use to build or buy 3 44-gun frigates and 3 36-gun frigates. This was essentially the birth of the United States Navy that we know today. One of the first ships completed was the USS Constitution. It was built in direct response to Muslim attacks on Americans. Currently, as new assaults on America by Islamic fundamentalists have resumed, the legendary warship is still in existence.
This is the USS Constitution, which was built in reaction to Arab attacks on American ships and enslavement of Americans. The entire U.S. Navy had been abolished after the Revolutionary War, And it was reestablished and put on a permanent basis specifically to deal with Arab attacks on American ships, which the Arabs felt that they were justified doing in the name of Islam. The U.S. Constitution was one of the first ships that was built to fight the North African states, and it is still here in memory of its heroic efforts in that era. And it helped to defeat the Arabs and establish the U.S. as a world power, an independent power.
The day might have been influenced by the naval buildup, and signed a treaty on September 5, 1795. It specified that the American prisoners would be released in exchange for the payment of $642,000, in addition to an annual tribute of $21,600 and a supply of arms and other military equipment. It was an early arms for hostages deal. Predictably, many of the arms supplied to Algiers were eventually used against the United States. Even after the agreement was signed, the Dey did not release the hostages until almost a year later. He waited until he was sufficiently enriched by the U.S. Treasury. On July 12, 1796, American diplomat Joel Barlow notified his government that the surviving hostages have finally been released. At least 37 died in captivity, and several were blinded. Others showed the marks of unmerciful treatment produced by hard labor. President Thomas Jefferson had long advocated a forceful policy to deal with Arab attacks and duplicity. He was held back by an isolationist Congress and the appeasement policy of former President John Adams. Events finally left him no choice but to act. On May 14, 1801, Pasha Yusuf Karamanli of Tripoli declared war against the United States. This was the first official declaration of war against America. It was a precursor to today's jihads. Even before that declaration, Jefferson was preparing for action in the Middle East and was therefore able to move quickly. He organized a Mediterranean naval squadron. American forces were instructed regarding potential military actions and how to treat prisoners. Their orders included the provision that any prisoners you may take, you will treat with humanity and attention and land them on some part of the Barbary shore most convenient to you. Even though U.S. captives in North America had often been brutalized, Americans were not to take revenge, but to act compassionately towards the enemy. Because Congress was not in session, Jefferson decided to send a strong naval force to the Mediterranean on his own authority as commander-in-chief. The fleet sailed on June 2, 1801, from Hampton Roads, Virginia, under the command of Commodore Richard Dale. It included the frigates President, Philadelphia, and Essex. The fourth ship was the Enterprise. They were to be engaged in the first foreign war in American history. The first major conflict of the war took place on August 1, 1801. The Enterprise came upon the Tripoli, which was the flagship of Admiral Rais Mahomet Rus. In a 3-hour naval battle, the American ship commanded by Lieutenant Sterrett devastated the Libyan ship. The Tripolitan admiral hauled down his flag as if surrendering. When Enterprise moved in to accept the surrender, the admiral raised his flag again and opened fire. The American vessel responded in turn with a storm of cannon fire. Mahomet Rais again attempted the ruse of surrendering, but this time without success. Finally, the Libyan ship was crippled, and American Marines and sailors went aboard and found that most of the Arabs were dead or injured. Not one American was injured. Sterrett ordered his surgeons to treat the enemy casualties and allowed the Tripoli to return home. The news of the Enterprise's heroic victory thrilled America. President Jefferson reported on the Tripoli War and its initial success in his annual message to the United States Congress. On February 6, 1802, Congress authorized military operations against Tripoli. It instructed Jefferson to instruct his naval commanders to take actions of precaution or hostility as the state of war will justify and may, in his opinion, require. The president now had full constitutional authority to wage war against Tripoli and other potential enemies of America in the area. Though the resolution was a great encouragement to the president, he had already taken new strong measures in the war on his own initiative. On January 12, 1802, 5 more warships had been deployed to the theater of operations. Others would soon follow. On October 31, 1803, at 11 a.m., the U.S. warship Philadelphia, under command of William Bainbridge, ran aground near Tripoli harbor. The crew attempted to fight, but were surrounded and outnumbered by Muslim warships under the leadership of Grand Admiral Murad Rees, the same man who had earlier been captured and released by Captain Sterrett. Seeing no other recourse, Bainbridge surrendered, and over 300 sailors and their officers went into captivity. The government of Tripoli offered to sell the officers back to the U.S. for $1,600,000. This amount was more than half of the federal budget, and the president could not comply. American naval personnel continued to be held as enslaved hostages. William Ray was a sailor on the ill-fated ship and chronicled his experiences.
November 10th, 1803. The Turks appeared very savage and spit on us as we passed the streets. The keepers or drivers beat us without any pretext, and acted more like infernal than human beings. The floor of our prison was not large enough to contain or admit all of us stretched to full length, and many of us were obliged to sit or stand all night. This occasioned a strife or crowding at the prison door. To be the first, or at least not the last, counted in, for the first were considered as being lawfully entitled to the spot of ground for the night, and no one attempted to eject or oust them. It was surprising to witness the invincible spirit of our towers. William Ray.
The capture of the Philadelphia was the first major disaster of the new American Navy. However, as so often during war, defeats were more than balanced by acts of extreme heroism. Tripoli was trying to raise the Philadelphia so that it could be transformed into one of their own warships. Since it was one of the most powerful of all U.S. vessels, Commodore Preble was determined to prevent the fulfillment of this plan. In February 1804, he dispatched 2 small ships under the command of 26-year-old Lieutenant Stephen Decatur to resolve the problem. In a daring raid, a small force managed to set fire and destroy the Philadelphia and keep her from falling into enemy hands. There was not one American casualty. Decatur's exploit made him an instant hero, and Jefferson promoted him to captain, making him the youngest man to hold that rank in the U.S. Navy. However, more than 300 naval personnel remained hostages, and the condition of their imprisonment was made more severe because the Pasha was infuriated by the loss of the Philadelphia. Commodore Preble was determined to take even more decisive action, but he lacked sufficient military resources. He was encouraged by a secret message that he received from imprisoned Captain Bainbridge in Tripoli. Somehow the naval officer managed to smuggle out a note written in invisible lemon juice. Once treated chemically, the writing became readable. The messages detailed information on the defenses of the Arab capital and advised an American attack to seize Tripoli. Preble was determined to fulfill this strategy. He faced a daunting task. The city defenses were formidable, with well-built walls and numerous cannon. On the beautiful sunny day of August 3, 1804, at 1:30 p.m., Preble gave the signal to attack. Allied forces started a massive assault on enemy ships and fortifications. Captain Decatur led his men on several boarding assaults on the warships of Tripoli, and displays of daring that would make today's Hollywood action movies look pale by comparison, the young officer quickly captured 2 enemy gunboats. Many Tripolitans were killed or injured, while only half a dozen Americans, including Decatur himself, were wounded. The bitterly fought naval action resulted in a clear-cut American victory. Not one U.S. ship was lost, and 6 enemy warships had been captured or sunk. Unfortunately, most of the Tripoli forces had managed to escape, so the battle did not resolve the war. The focus now shifted to land operations. Following a plan set in motion by Preble, President Jefferson approved an attempt at regime change in Tripoli. William Eaton, the U.S. consul in Tunisia, another North African nation, was directed to replace Tripoli's Pasha with his brother Ahmet. Should the effort be successful, the latter promised to be an ally of the United States. Early in 1805, Eaton arrived at Alexandria, Egypt, to organize the effort to complete the presidential mission. He only had 1 midshipman and 7 Marines under the command of Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon. The Battle of Tripoli was to be the baptism of fire for the United States Marines and immortalized in the Marine Corps hymn "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli." The forces available to Eaton were clearly inadequate, so he enlisted as many recruits as he could locally. He enlisted about 70 Christian soldiers, primarily Greek Orthodox Christians, along with some Serbs. Ahmet had his personal retinue of around 90 fighting men. On March 5, 1805, William Eaton led his small army across the Libyan desert towards Tripoli. Over 50 days, Eaton's force endured numerous hardships while traveling in the desolate terrain of North Africa. Both food and water fell short. There were treacherous sandstorms and oppressive heat throughout the epic journey. Eaton was determined to persevere against all odds so that the 300 prisoners of war held in Tripoli could be liberated. As if the hardships of nature weren't enough, Eaton also had to suffer from cultural clash with his Muslim allies. They mutinied frequently. On April 8, 1805, the Muslim troops attempted to storm the supply tent and steal the expedition's supplies, including food and water. In a tense standoff, they were barely held off by 8 Marines and 38 Greeks. Without the unity of the American and Greek Christian recruits, the mission would have been a failure, since the reliability of the Muslim troops was highly questionable. Many of the Muslims deserted.
The mission was to march from Egypt to Derna in Libya through desert, a very difficult territory, hot sands, and halfway through, the Arab mercenaries asked for more money, otherwise they would refuse to fight. They had been paid whatever they had been promised, but now they wanted more. So in order to save the expedition, William Eaton was faced with a problem. He had no more money at all. And so he was able to get a loan from the Greeks, who stepped forward and offered to finance the rest of the expedition and loan Eaton what he needed. And that saved the financial aspects of the expedition. Later on, when it came a number of times when it came to an actual conflict, the Arabs ran away or were very unreliable in fighting, and the Greeks and the other Orthodox Christians stayed loyal to the United States and Eaton all the way through. At one point, the Arabs decided that they would just totally desert and take the supplies, food and water, and go back to Alexandria, Egypt. And the Marines lifted their guns to defend themselves, and the Greeks and all the Orthodox Christians stepped up and brought their guns up and stood side by side with the Marines and saved the expedition. The Arabs backed off. Once they saw a united, strong force against them, they backed off and they went on with William Eaton.
After 52 days of a harrowing desert journey, on April 25, 1805, the remnants of Eaton's little army reached the outskirts of Derna, the second largest city in Tripoli. But this time, several American warships had arrived near Derna's harbor to assist in the attempt to take the city. Eaton requested Derna's surrender, but the city's governor, Mustafa Bey, refused and responded, "My head or yours." On April 27, Eaton launched his assault on the city. The Marines and the Christians, led by Lieutenant O'Bannon, did most of the fighting. Two Marines and several Greek Orthodox Christians died in the action. Mustafa hid in a harem. Eaton was told by his Arab advisors that going in after him would violate Muslim sensibilities and delayed taking action until Mustafa was able to escape. Eaton raised the stars and stripes over Derna, the first time that this was done on foreign territory in American history. The Pasha of Tripoli was shaken by the capture of his city. He notified the U.S. government that unless they held their advance on Tripoli, he would kill the hundreds of military and civilian hostages he held prisoner. Fearing for the lives of the prisoners, U.S. Consul Lear signed a peace treaty with Tripoli. Pasha Youssef was allowed to remain in power. After 4 years, the war was over. 296 naval hostages were soon released. 6 of the crew had died due to the harsh treatment in captivity of almost 2 years. William Eaton was embittered by the peace treaty. He felt that defeat was stolen out of the jaws of victory, and this constituted a sellout of his men and their allies.
After the victory of Derna, when the Marine Corps hymn was written and composed, it included the phrase "From the wholesome Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli," which was celebrating the victory, basically the victory at Derna of the Marines. But what is neglected is recognition of the huge contribution that the Orthodox contingent made to that victory. There is no public memorial to the Greeks and other Orthodox Christians who supported the Marine Corps, who made it possible for the victory to take place. Without them, there would have been no victory whatsoever. There's no way that less than 10 U.S. troops could have defeated hundreds of Arabs, since the Arab allies were deserting and repeatedly. They only had the Orthodox Christians to support them and save the expedition. Well, it's possible that the United States would have lost the first war, since this was really the first jihad against America, the first war, foreign war of the United States, if it wasn't for the help of the Greeks and the Orthodox Christians. Since there's no memorial, I think now is the time to have a memorial to the Greeks and other Orthodox Christians to save the Marines, essentially save the lives of the Marines and save the lives of the hostages. We need to have a public memorial, and we need to step forward to do something about it at this stage.
Mac, give me 6 of them tickets, will you? We still got a little work to do in our own line. So long, kid.
Goodbye. Will you come back?
Well, we always come back before. So long, everybody. See yous in church. Come on, everybody.
So long, gang.
All aboard!
I don't know how to...
Don't say it. It was a pleasure. Anything for the son of an old pal.
I knew the Marines could do almost anything, but I never knew they could do anything like this.
You got no idea.